Welcome to The Homeless Conservative. I'm your host, Blake Fisher, and today I'm flying solo with no guest. I just figured probably need to talk about what's going on in Israel currently. It seems kind of important, and it's also one of those things that I feel like, for the most part, as Americans, we just don't have a great grasp or understanding of what's going on in foreign affairs, and I think that's fine. I think that for the most part, that's why we elect people, is that we want to elect people that will take care of paying attention to those details and create policies that work for us and the countries that we're trying to support. And obviously there are a lot of different areas of foreign policy that are complicated right now. We've obviously got a Russia-Ukraine situation that's very kind of hot. Obviously there's an actual war going on there. And then you've got China potentially wanting to invade Taiwan, another country we're claiming that we'd back up in such a situation. And then Israel, basically our democratic partners in the Middle East, have been attacked over the weekend by Hamas. And so I think this stuff matters. I think Americans, when they're faced with kind of this, an attack like this, that it sobers them up a little bit maybe and get a lot of questions. And I feel like a lot of times in the media, when things are complicated, the nuance of it gets lost and we get to kind of bullet points and talking points on both sides. And this situation is not going to be any different, I don't think, than any others, where you're going to have a right versus left narrative. People are going to sort. And so just thought it'd be worth talking about some of that and some of the points. I'm not a foreign policy expert at all. I like to try to pay attention to stuff, but I'm definitely in that camp of I like to trust that let's elect people that are good at that job. And so, I think we've turned the presidency into a thing that, I don't know, we treat it kind of like a king in the United States more than I would like, and we expect them to be able to solve all of our problems. And I don't think that's a fair assessment of what the presidency is really supposed to accomplish. Really, Congress is supposed to make laws, and the president can help guide that and say what his agenda is. But it's really up to Congress to do a lot of the stuff that we expect presidents to do now. But one thing that's absolutely under the things that the president is supposed to do is, Article 2 says they're going to command the military, and foreign relations are absolutely a necessary thing for the president to do. The president of the United States really, I think, is the most important part of that. Not that Congress and people like, the Senate with foreign relations committees aren't important. It's just that figurehead of the president is the person that can go over and meet with other leaders, and I think that it's important. And so I think it's really important to have a president with foreign policy chops of some sort. What's tricky about that is that I tend to like governors better as presidents because they've been executives before. So they've ran a state, and but that generally doesn't mean you have a lot of foreign policy experience, because if you are the governor of Florida, for example, Ron DeSantis, what foreign relations are you going to have other than he was in Congress at least at one point? So you go, okay, well, maybe he got some then. But, Nikki Haley's a good example of someone that is running for president. She was a governor. She also ran the UN. She was our delegate to the UN. So, that it's nice to have a balance there. I just wonder if I think this is going to potentially change some of the dynamic of the Republican primary, because I think people pay a little bit more attention to foreign stuff when something like this happens. So anyway, let's just get into it, talk a little bit about it. So I was not paying attention to the news on Saturday when all this happened. I was getting wings prepped because, politics is not actually my entire life. As big of a nerd as I am for news and politics, I had not opened my phone at all Saturday morning. I was getting ready for the OU Texas game, which we were victorious in, of course. And so making wings, and in the middle of the game, basically ABC News broke in to mention what was happening and show what was happening and show Biden's statement about the situation. And so that was the first I'd heard of it, but throughout the day, I was trying to pay attention to some news. It was a really busy day, though. I had a show that night. I'm in a Weezer cover band, in case you needed to know. Also the level of nerddom that happens over here. But so I was pretty busy. I didn't get to pay a lot of attention to it, but that's how life should be, I guess, sometimes. But so, that's obviously a pretty big thing to see that on the news that Hamas has attacked Israel on multiple fronts. And it was especially shocking because you've probably heard, if nothing else, that Israel has a pretty robust defense and intelligence gathering apparatus in the sense that they are under attack all the time. So Hamas, and we'll get into some of the details of how this is set up, but Hamas is indiscriminately firing rockets into Israel all the time. And so they have an Iron Dome defense system that's supposed to shoot these rockets out of the air, but they were getting bombarded with I saw numbers that were 5,000 rockets over the course of Saturday and Sunday. So this is a lot more than the normal amount that Iron Dome can handle. And so they were getting through the defense things. But also just if you've ever had a friend that traveled to Israel, you'll know that they are not like our TSA in the sense that they're just picking random people out of the line. They are absolutely profiling. They are pretty tough in interviews. They're making sure that they realize that people want to wipe them off the face of the planet. So they take security really seriously. So it was surprising that something of this scale happened. Some people are saying it's not surprising, but I feel like that's always a hindsight thing. Anytime you read the news and people are like, this was totally predictable. It's well, then why didn't we see a lot of people predicting it? And maybe there were some. I'm not saying there were not tensions, but it seems ridiculous to claim that, this was foreseeable. This was something that was just bound to happen. It seems like an intelligent failure, which obviously will be a conversation for a different day. They're not going to worry about that right now. Just like after 9/11, we had a lot of soul searching to do of how did this happen on our watch without us knowing it was going to happen. We're supposed to have the best intelligence in the world. And Israel's kind of like that in the Middle East. They're supposed to be this incredible defense apparatus, and it just didn't work out. So this was a really well-planned attack. This was funded by Iran. So little geopolitical context. Iran does not like Israel. Really, no one in the Middle East likes Israel, and all the Muslim countries would prefer that the Jewish state does not exist and really that Jews don't exist. So they don't have anywhere else to go. And people claim that Israelis are settlers or, you hear all sorts of, you hear that it's an apartheid state, you hear that they're colonizers. But I think it's important to understand a couple of things is that Israel does not have another place to go. Jewish people have been oppressed for a really, really, really long time, thousands of years, for as far back as we can go in human recorded history, essentially. And most of those people around them would like to eradicate them. And so Iran is one of them. So Iran is funding Hamas. Hamas controls Gaza, and which is an area inside of Israel, a Palestinian area, and Israel's not been there since 2005. But Hamas was elected in 2006. They've run it sort of with an iron fist. They don't allow elections anymore. They murdered all the rest of the opposition. Some of those opposition groups of Palestinian Arabs do control the West Banks, but the West Bank, but not Gaza. And so there is fighting within the control of the Palestinian stuff too. This gets so complicated by the sense that this is not an Israel versus Palestinian kind of situation. There are infighting within the Palestinian areas. There's obviously, it's not that Israel doesn't have any problems or hasn't handled everything correctly, but this was an attack. This was a terrorist attack. There's no other way to describe it. These are not militants. These are not freedom fighters. This was funded and planned by Iran, and that's according to Hamas. So that's, I think, the Washington Post confirmed that through Hamas, even though our intelligence is saying they can't confirm that Iran planned this and helped fund it. But I don't know if that just means our intelligence is slow rolling that information for some reason. But it seems pretty silly that our press could confirm via Hamas that Iran is in control of some of this operational stuff and funding, but our own intelligence can't. Seems like they might just be fibbing to us. I'm a little concerned about that. But anyway, don't really know what's going on there. But this is definitely Iran that's funding this. Iran also funds Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon, which is on the north border of Israel. And some of those attacks have actually started coming from the north as well, from Hezbollah in the meantime. And I should mention, I'm recording this on Tuesday morning, so things might change before this is even released. And so things are changing all the time. So I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds of the details of what's actually going on right now and just talk about what's been going on, sort of what's led to this. So the conflict, as far as the attacks that started on Saturday, These were surprise attacks. They did it by land, by sea, and even air. They used electric hang gliders to attack a music festival, for example. So this was really well thought out. They used bulldozers to go through borders. It seems like most of the Israeli military was near the West Bank, so it took them a long time to get to the areas that were being attacked, which were a lot of these like rural areas on the borders. And so it was devastating. I think the attack just in the music festival killed approximately 300 people, and they don't know how many people were kidnapped from it. So the reason I'm going to keep using the word terrorist is because that's what was going on. This is not Hamas attacking military targets. This is them attacking civilians. So a music festival, for example, not a military target. They're killing indiscriminately people. They're raping women. They're raping women next to to their dead friends' bodies. Like, they're filming murdering people on the victims' phones and then uploading those videos to the victims' Facebook accounts so that their families would witness their deaths. They're burning people alive in their houses. They're murdering parents in front of children and children in front of parents. There's one village where I think I read that there were 40 children and babies murdered, some of them decapitated. So this is like really, really terrible stuff. They kidnapped elderly Holocaust survivors, dragged naked bodies through the streets. They're decapitating soldiers. There are allegedly about 3,000 people dead on both sides so far. So I don't know the exact numbers, and it's going to change before this is released anyway. So this is terrorism. There's no other way to describe those acts other than terrorism. These are not, like I said, this is not military targets. This is targeting civilians. And that's because Hamas believes that the civilians are as guilty as the government. Because if you side with the government and you're Jewish, they want to kill you. They want to eradicate you. They don't want you to live there, and they don't want you to really live anywhere. They want you to die. That is their explicit goal. So it seems hard to have a peace situation when one side wants the other side eradicated. It just, and for all of the left's talk about people being Hitler, Trump is Hitler, blah, 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 and they're so scared of him being a fascist authoritarian. It's interesting to me that we don't hear the calls of Nazism or, when these guys literally want to be Hitler. They want to eradicate Jews just like Hitler did. They even use quotes from Hitler and, philosophies from Hitler to justify their actions. So it's interesting to me that we would call American politicians Hitler when, and then not this. It's interesting that I've seen media so far that's saying things like they're militants or they're freedom fighters or the conflict or, and they're putting it they're framing this in a way that makes it sound like this is just a dispute over land, which when it boils down to it, it is partially that. And let's talk about the history a little bit, because that's probably important in case you don't have kind of the understanding of what's been going on in Israel for the last, 100 years or so. So here's the shortest version of the complicated stories. This is the Cliff Notes version. I am not an expert on Israel. There are lots of great people. I'll put some links to other videos on YouTube in the notes if you want to check out, or maybe podcast that would go into more depth and have some better, like I said, I'm not an expert, but this is the bullet point version. So forgive me for giving the short version. So, obviously the Jews have been there for a very long time. If you weren't aware, since the sort of dawn of human history, they've been oppressed and wandering and getting kicked out of there, and they were slaves in Egypt. And so there's been thousands of years of this. This is not a short version. This is not 50 years of history. This is thousands of years of history. And they really didn't have a place to call home. And this is post-World War I. That area was ruled by the Ottoman Empire and eventually was given to the British control. And the British decided, this is like 1910, so this is like 1917, that they'd carve out like a sort of a solution where, Palestinians could have some areas, Israelites could have some areas, Jewish people could have some areas, because Jews were like flooding out of other countries where they weren't welcome. So there were other Muslim countries that didn't want Jewish people, so they were fleeing those. Obviously, in the lead up to World War II and during World War II, a lot of people fled Nazis into Israel. And so post World War II, the British controlled the area. And so and they had designated part of it for Jews. But the Jewish population grew by the end of World War II to like 33%, but they only had 6% of the land. And so there were conflicts there. So by 1948, there was a UN resolution that was rejected by the Arabs. It would have split the land, and so it would have split it like 42% Arab, 55% Jewish, and Jerusalem would have been under international control. The Palestinians, the Arabs, did not like that deal, and it's somewhat understandable. They were 60-something% of the population, and they were going to have 42% of the area of the land, and so they rejected that. And the Jews claimed independence. So Israel declares its independence in 1948, and there are attacks the very next day. So Palestinian and Arab state attacks in Israel the next day, and Israel gains control of a larger portion because of it, because they actually win that war. And so, and about 700,000 Palestinians flee or are driven out of their land as a result of that 1948 contact, or 1948 conflict. And so then in 1967, obviously lots of little skirmishes between now and then. That's 20 years. There's a 6-day war, which you've probably heard of. This is another Arab-Israeli war, and it's normally all the Arab countries joining together to fight Israel, just for the record. And normally Israel's the one defensively postured in the sense that they're the ones being attacked. And this time it's Egypt and Jordan and other Arab fighters. In that war, Israel takes control of Gaza, Sinai, and West Bank, Golan Heights, East Jerusalem. And so they take more territory after 1967. 1972, you've probably heard of the Munich Olympics attacks, where Palestinian extremists, they raid the dorms where the Israeli athletes were staying. They killed 2, took 9 hostages. They eventually killed them all. This was obviously a big, just escalates the tension even more. There's another attack in 1973 by an Arab coalition, and this time it's Egypt and Syria. They launch a surprise attack on Israel on Yom Kippur, which is a Jewish holiday. And this attack, this recent one, this past weekend, was basically the 50th anniversary of that. So the motivation seems to be partially, hey, here's the 50-year anniversary of the last surprise attack. Here's another one. It also, well, we'll get into some more motivations in a second, but it's also, there was a U.S. brokered deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel that Iran, obviously, who is also the enemy of Saudi Arabia, did not want to happen. So a lot of people think that's the motivation here as well. But basically, since 1973, there have just been tons of little conflicts. So peppered throughout the 80s and 90s. In the 90s, we got the Oslo Accords that set out to have the Palestinians self-rule the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but it didn't resolve what to do about Jerusalem and like Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And so it didn't bring the peace, because they didn't really know what to do. And again, in 2000, Israel offered to create a Palestinian state in all of Gaza and 97% of the West Bank, but the Palestinians said no. So they rejected that, which would have been sort of a 2-state solution, meaning that, Palestinians have control over their areas and Israel has control over their areas, even though those Palestinian areas are within Israel. So that's another complicated thing. All of their borders are surrounded by Israel, who they want to eliminate. So it's hard to find a good solution here sometimes. Same thing happens in 2005. So Israel's out of Gaza completely at that point. And then in 2006, Hamas wins an election in Gaza. So basically, Hamas takes control of Gaza. Israel follows up by, they impose a 16-year blockade of Gaza where 2 million Palestinians live. And so this creates a humanitarian crisis in the area. And so this is where I think a lot of people's problems with Israel comes is that they don't like the humanitarian problems that sort of cutting off and blockading Gaza created. And it's complicated, again, because this is an area that's ran by a terrorist organization who, by the way, immediately started murdering any political opposition to them in Hamas. And Hamas is not, again, they're not fighters. They're not freedom fighters. They're not militants. They're terrorists. They murder their opposition. They treat the civilians within Gaza as human shields. They do things like store weapons in hospitals so that if Israel wants to attack munition bases, they have to attack a hospital. So this is the kind of stuff that terrorists do. This is not the kind of thing that state actors in militaries do. And so, but this does create a humanitarian crisis. Most of the people in Gaza are living in refugee camps, and most of their aid comes from UN aid. It doesn't because of the blockades from Israel. So, by 2008, Israel offers to withdraw from nearly the entire West Bank and to partition Jerusalem basically by population. And in addition, they've continued to keep soldiers out of Gaza. And so, but Palestinians still say no to this deal. So this is 2000, they say no. 2008, they say no. And, it should be noted that, again, Hamas is funded mostly by Iran. And Israel obviously also, Iran hates Israel, hates Jewish, hates Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of this the enemy of my enemy is my friend stuff going on because it's again super complicated in the Middle East. But Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, which they fund, their explicit goals call for the eradication of Jews and Israel. So where would Jewish people go in that situation is my question. I think that is worth asking. And if all of the surrounding countries hate them and don't just want them to not exist as a state, but want them to be eradicated, where do they have to go? And so when this brings up some of the sort of misnomers that I feel like are worth talking about. So we hear about Israel being a colonial state. That's like a common thing that people on the left in America are going to call it. But it doesn't make a lot of sense because the original Jewish settlers in like the late 19th century, early 20th century, they were escaping countries that didn't want them. So they were fleeing from countries that didn't want them. So would you call, for example, would someone on the left call a Venezuelan that flees Venezuela to come to the United States, and then, let's say they start setting up, sort of not taking over, but sort of settling in areas together. So I live in Oklahoma City. There's a really large Vietnamese refugee. I mean, what started as refugees from the Vietnamese War or Vietnam War, and but there's a whole community. There's a whole Asian district that like sprung up from that. No one would call them colonizers, right? They fled their country, their original country, Jews didn't even have a home, but they were fleeing these other countries where they were being murdered and forced out and settled here where they had been before. They were Israel. I mean, if this is regardless of whether you are religious or not, but I mean, this is history. And so, they were forced out of their land before they came back to it in the 19th and 20th century. So to call them a colonial state just doesn't seem to fit the definition of that word. But with the left's current obsession with everything being an oppressor and an oppressed person, they have to use language like this. But it's just, by every definition, Israel could not be a colonial state. They were refugees coming back to the land that they originally had and were forced out of. And they'd been there for thousands of years. And then every war and conflict that's happened in the area since is always Israel being on the defensive. So they're getting rockets fired into their civilian areas and they are being attacked, and they're never the aggressors. Okay. Are basically never the aggressors. And so in all of these conflicts, so I just don't see how they're not marching into areas, taking over lands. In fact, they've been trying to give land back to Palestinians, but they can't find a deal that Palestinians will say yes to. So yeah, is there a deal maybe that they would? I don't think that there would be, because if your stated goal is that there is no Jewish state and that you want the eradication of an entire race or religion of people, how can you ever come to a compromise? Like, what is the compromise? I would just like someone on the left to tell me what is the solution here. And I don't think they can get to it without saying, when you speak of like colonization, their only goal then is to like force those people out. And that's my question, is where would the Jewish people go? Where would Israelis go? They wouldn't have a place to go in that entire region because that whole region hates them. And let's talk about why they hate them. I mean, it's a good question because, you know, Arabs in Israel have more rights than they tend to in other Arab nations. Like, for example, like they have the right to vote. They are represented in government. They are on the Supreme Court. They are doctors and students, and they make up 20% of the Israeli population. And they are not, they do have some, they're not completely on the same level as Israeli, like Jewish citizens. But so there's work to go there, but they've like drastically increased their presence in the country. Like I said, 20% of the population is Arab inside of Israel. And they have worked to secure more and more rights as years and years go on. And so, and most of them, when like polled and stuff, say that they would prefer to be there and they don't want to live in a different country. And so it's interesting to me that we don't get arguments from the left about the atrocities that go on in places like Iran or in Gaza or in places that are controlled by essentially people that support terrorism or terrorists themselves. And instead, we go after the democratic state that's in the region. It's not ruled by a dictator. It's not out to murder a group of people. It's not trying to eradicate a people. It's not trying to eradicate Palestinians. And I know that there are things that Israel's done wrong over the last, especially 50 years. Like, they're not without any blemish on them for sure. In fact, there is some extreme right-wing stuff in the current government that is, I think, wrong. I think that, you know, they have some people high up that were previously convicted of like, I don't know if it's like war crimes, but essentially, yeah, like, so that's not good stuff. They should work to fix that, but that's on them. Not saying they're perfect. I am just saying that for the most part, when they're dealing with people that want to eradicate them, I understand why you might have a different posture than I do. I've never been in a country or a group of people that all of my neighbors wanted to murder all of us. That's just, I think it's hard for us as Americans to understand what that would possibly be like. So I think we're right to support them. I think the left is wrong. And by the way, when I say the left, most Democrats have come out and said that, like, the squad and the things that they've been saying where they're trying to humanize these terrorists that attacked innocent people on Saturday, they're getting called out for that, and they're being reprimanded vocally, publicly by other Democrats. So this is not all Democrats. This is just the far left, and I want to make that distinction because I think it's important. This is not all Democrats. Biden came out with a really strong statement, and a lot of Democrats came out with really strong statements supporting Israel and the Jewish people and condemning the attacks. Whereas, like, the squad people, Ilhan Omar, Tlaib, AOC, can't bring themselves to, they said, basically, we should ceasefire. Oh, everyone should just be peaceful. Don't retaliate. That list of stuff that I rattled off earlier that Hamas did over the weekend, I would just like you to imagine that happening to the people you knew and loved or your neighbors and not wanting to retaliate. That's all I'd say about that. So, anyway, so let's go on to like some other things. So, okay, why should they not be called militants and fighters? Because I've seen a lot of news. The president of the Anti-Defamation League was on MSNBC this weekend and kind of called them out for, like, who is writing your scripts? I mean, the language and how you're downplaying some of what is going on and humanizing these terrorists. Like, why are you doing this? Like, this is not what's going on. And so I think that some of that language is unhelpful. calling people militants and fighters when they want to eradicate an entire people, and they're doing things like murdering and raping civilians and dragging their bodies through the streets and all those things I mentioned earlier, attacking music festivals. That's not freedom fighting. That is terrorism. The goal, the stated goal, is to terrify people and for political gain. And so they're Islamic extremists. They think civilians are fair game because if they're loyalist to a non-Muslim enemy of theirs, they can kill them, and they believe that that's okay. And like I said, the level of cruelty to, like, oh my gosh, to film something on someone's phone and upload it to their Facebook account so that their families would find the videos of them being murdered. That's just a level of evil that I can't comprehend trying to humanize and try to say that that's fighting for freedom, or that that's a legitimate way to stand up to oppression, even if they are oppressed, which I think is the wrong word in this situation anyway. But we can have discussions about that, but you can't humanize what they're doing. It's not okay. And again, to be clear, like, Hamas is controlling Gaza completely. Israel's not in Gaza, which is where these attacks were launched out of, essentially. And they use innocent Palestinians as human shields. And the innocent loss of life in Palestine is going to be, and in Gaza is going to be just as bad. Innocent civilians losing their lives is bad no matter what. And but just understand that, like, the dynamic there is that Hamas is attacking civilians on purpose and killing them without any military strategy other than to kill civilians, while Israel has to kill civilians in Gaza because Hamas is using them as human shields by putting their munitions and headquarters and things like that in areas where they are shielded by humans, by innocent people inside of Gaza. And so they know what they're doing. Most of the time, pre this weekend, I don't think you're going to see as much of this happening now, but prior to this, if Israel generally needed to strike inside of Gaza for retaliatory purposes or to try to hit a military target, they would send warnings. Either they would send mass texts out, or they would explode the rooftop of a building to basically give the warning to the rest of the people in the building, it is time to get out of that building, because that's the warning shot, and the next one that comes in is taking the building down. And so they've been trying to not kill as many civilians as possible. And I think that shows restraint. Like, keep in mind, when Gaza is firing rockets into Israel all the time, and for the most part, the Iron Dome eliminates those threats, but that's it didn't work over the weekend because they overwhelmed it. And so they're going to have to strike back, and their goal is to eliminate Hamas. So unfortunately, innocent people are going to die inside of Gaza as well. And that's unfortunate, and it's terrible just the same, but that the dynamic is different in the sense that Hamas is using them as human shields, as opposed to Israel, who their civilians are just being attacked and murdered. I think that's an important distinction. So, few facts just about Hamas, because I think they're important to talk about. They hate Jewish people. They, as I mentioned, they want to eradicate them. They also deny Israel's right to exist. So there is no two-state solution that is going to make Hamas happy. They reject that completely. And they don't want a citizen-controlled Palestinian government either. They're oppressing people in Palestine, or in Gaza right now, the Palestinians. They are, like I said, murdered their political opposition, which their political opposition is basically the people that run the West Bank. And those people have also, which I forget the name of that group, I've just totally drawn a blank on it, but they've suspended elections too. Their president has been ruling for 17 years. He's supposed to have a 4-year term, because they keep canceling elections because they're worried about Hamas taking over West Bank too. So, like I mentioned, there's infighting between the Palestinian groups as well. So what does this change, I think, is the important thing to talk about, because I think a lot changed over the weekend worldwide. I mean, I think we were focusing on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but now we've got a second conflict, and this is not going to be over quick. Everything I've read, smarter people than me think this is going to last months at the minimum. And so we're obviously backing Ukraine and Israel in both these situations, It's going to further, I would assume, hurt our, ammunition supply, stockpile storage. And that concerns me a little bit. But it does, I hope, sober people up to realize that we need serious foreign policy people in the White House. Like I mentioned at the top of this show, is that I don't think the American people have taken foreign policy serious enough, so we don't elect people that take it seriously enough. I don't think Biden's been good at foreign policy. Honestly, I think Trump had better foreign policy than Biden does. I don't like a lot about Trump, but I think for the most part, he hired serious people and filled positions, cabinet positions with serious people that did good, and he listened to their advice. I think that's the other key thing there, is that when Trump listened to the people that he put in charge of foreign stuff, John Bolton, General Milley, there's a lot of people that were in, John Kelly, his chief of staff. I think he made pretty good decisions, including like moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, I think was a good move. I think that he did stuff specifically in Israel that was good. I think Biden has pretty much had foreign policy failure after failure. If you go back to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I don't think it's inconceivable to think that us looking so bad in that withdrawal, and keep in mind some of those weapons have now ended up in the hands of terrorists that we left behind. I think that gave Iran some, let's say, I don't think it made them pause when they thought about funding and planning a Hamas attack inside of Israel. I think they think we're weak. I think our Afghanistan withdrawal made Russia think we're weak. I think it made China think we're weak. I think that all of that has made these bad actors in Russia, in Iran, in North Korea, not that they've made a lot of action since, but they're partnering with some of these people. And in China, I think most of these people have gone, maybe the West is not such a formidable opponent anyway. Maybe we're wrong about that. And so I think the Afghanistan withdrawal was a huge, huge turning point as far as how our enemies saw us. And I just don't think Biden's proved he can be that guy, even with the Ukraine, where I think we should support Ukraine. I think we should give them what they need to fight back Russia, especially when it, for so little of our military budget, it depletes Russia's military. Russia's sustained something like 300,000 casualties in Ukraine so far. Casualties being deaths or injuries that take those people out of the battlefield. Just to put that in perspective, we had 54,000 casualties in all of the Vietnam War over the decade, okay? So it's been pretty devastating to Russia, and I think supporting Ukraine, if that puts a dent in Russia's capabilities to move further past Ukraine and recreate the Soviet Union, I think that's a good use of our money. But I don't think Biden's actually done it that well, because generally Ukraine has asked for something and then we delay for a really long time. We hem and haw about, should we train them on fighter jets? Should we not? And meanwhile, it takes 8 months for them to get the things that they're asking for that they needed 8 months ago. So we are drawing this thing out. I think that if we're going to support Ukraine, and if we've got the budget to do so, and that's allocated by Congress, I think we should act immediately to get them whatever they want, within reason. Obviously, we're not going to give them a nuclear weapon. But if they need fighter jets, if they need to be trained on fighter jets, let's get them fighter jets. If they need cluster bombs, another big, everyone was talking about cluster bombs. How could you possibly give them to them? Look, they're asking for them. We've got old cluster bombs we're not going to use. Why not give them to them? But we slow drag that too. So we just slow play everything with them. And so I just don't think Biden's been great. Now, what he said on Saturday was the right thing to say. I just want to see it backed up with actions. I do think this has implications in the presidential race. I think people seeing the Ukraine war, seeing these attacks, I think people are going to maybe think a little bit more about foreign policy next year when they go to the polls. And so I don't know that Biden's going to get, it's weird on these kind of things. Like if we got attacked, I think it would help Biden, just because that generally does. There's a sense of national unity if like the United States gets attacked. But when all these other conflicts are going on, and I think there will be I think it's reasonable for people to say, okay, when Trump was president, we didn't have a conflict like this that we had to get in the middle of. That's not entirely true. But if people's perception is that, I can see why, because there wasn't an ongoing like Ukraine war, and there's not going to be this ongoing Israeli conflict with Hamas. That those didn't happen under Trump. So I can see why people would jump to the conclusion that, hey, maybe we should vote for Trump. Seemed like he was better at this. And Trump's claiming, of course, that, none of this would have happened if he was president. I love that dumb explanation of things. He just says it wouldn't have happened. Same thing with Ukraine. It wouldn't have happened. It's a non-falsifiable claim. We can't prove that it wouldn't have happened because he's not president. I think it's a lot of bluster. I don't think that he's just saying it, but he's not saying why. It's like why? Because people were scared of you? Maybe that's true, but we can't prove it. So instead, I'd love Trump to talk about what he would do, not just about what wouldn't have happened under his watch, because it doesn't matter. He's not the president, so he couldn't prevent this. But if you want to be elected again, what would you do to solve this problem now? You can't just say, oh, I'd have it solved in 24 hours, which is what he claims about the Ukraine conflict too. He claims that he would negotiate a great deal. It'd be great. Everyone would be happy. I want to see the details of that plan. Maybe some people will buy that he would just solve it. I think people are going to want explanations of what they would do. And I think people want to see that action from Biden. And if they don't get it from Biden, they're going to look for it elsewhere. And they might look for it in Trump. But I want explanations from Trump. Maybe it will make people seriously consider and look at some of the rest of the GOP field. I think Nikki Haley stands to, I don't want to say benefit from this, because that sounds gross when we're dealing with terrorist attacks on innocent civilians and thousands of people dying. But you've got someone that has the governor experience, like I mentioned, and she also was at the UN. So she has the foreign policy experience. It'd be hard for Trump to argue that she doesn't when he hired her for that UN job. So she's the ambassador to the UN. She has some foreign relations. I know that some Republicans are wary of a very hawkish, people think that she just wants to attack people. And I get why people post Iraq and Afghanistan are wary of that. But I think we need serious people. I actually think Ron DeSantis had some really good foreign policy answers in the debates, because mostly dealing with China, because we are fighting China on more of an economic front than militarily right now. And so some of that are things that governors can control. Like Ron DeSantis mentioned in the last debate, he's banned the Chinese Communist Party from buying land in Florida. I think that's a good move, and it lets him have some foreign policy chops and talk about foreign policy as a governor of a state. Like I said, he was in Congress before he was governor, so he has some experience there. But I do wonder if the Republican electorate looks at people like Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, just anyone with sort of foreign policy experience, and goes like, maybe we should listen to them a little bit more. I'm curious to see what happens in the next debate that happens in November, and how much of it will be filled with foreign policy, because I think that it might be a little bit more on people's minds. It's just tricky because we're also dealing with a lot of economic problems ourselves. We're dealing with inflation. We're dealing with all of that, which is obviously on people's minds because it's affecting their real lives and their pocketbooks. But when scary things like this happen, I just wonder how the electorate will react. I hope that it can start some real debates about real policy stuff. I am not optimistic that that's going to be the case, but we also have the problem of like, there is no Speaker of the House. Congress can't really act without that. So we'll see what happens. But I think that it's just important in all of this context to remember that you're probably going to read stuff that's going to talk about freedom fighters or colonialization or apartheid, or they're going to just throw out all sorts of words about Israel. And I think that most of that's pretty unfair. And I think there is that leftward tendency to make everyone sort into oppressors and oppressed, I think is really damaging, and it just cannot handle the scope of the complications of these foreign policy situations. Like it's not that easy. It's not, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy, and here's the easy solution. None of that is like this. And so it's going to take serious people with serious plans and serious negotiation to create anything that looks like peace over there. I don't believe it's really possible. It's not it's just not possible when there are countries that you border that want to eradicate you as a people. Until you can change that mentality in Hamas and in Iran and in, pick the country, I don't see how there's going to be some plan that's going to make everyone happy. But, it's not my job. So I hope I'm wrong. But I think for right now, we need to back Israel, give them what they need. And we'll see what happens. Like I said, this is going to change a lot. I think it's going to change our presidential race. And I think it's going to change our politics a little bit here. It's hard for it not to. And so, but everyone should pay attention, and I highly suggest just reading, finding people that you trust and read them and get sober opinions on what's actually going on, and that read into the nuance of what's going on. So much of our news now tries to really dumb stuff down to really explainable versions of it, which, to be fair, I'm trying to do on this podcast right now. But sometimes we try to condense it way too much into like an article you can read in 3 minutes or an Instagram post. And I think this is just a little too complicated for that. So I would definitely strongly suggest you dive in a little deeper than the sort of bullet point stuff, even including, why listen to me? Like, go check out some sources that I'll put in the notes and read some of this stuff for yourself. And I think it's worth us demanding that our leaders pay attention to this stuff. So that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on a solo ranting episode without a guest. I will try to get an actual expert maybe sometime on this stuff that can tell me a lot more and answer more of my questions about the complicated nature of the problems in the Middle East and specifically in Israel. And so I'll try to get a guest on for that, but at sort of the last minute of the attack starting on Saturday and me trying to record this on Tuesday, just wasn't time to find someone. So try to do that in the near future, and I hope you'll join me next time.